Hey, y'all.
Hi.
Hey.
So the three of us are friends, and we've known each other a long, long time. So you guys get to just watch us chat. And I wish you could ask questions, but that would take way too long because our half-hour talk could easily be a 90-minute talk. So where would we all like to start?
I was thinking we could start with, since the topic is access to capital. I'm on the debt side, so I work with loans, and I was thinking we could start with the other side of financing businesses, equity, and kind of go from there.
Cool. I take it you're looking at me.
I am.
I'll do that. So Stephen Green, I am a recovering banker, so I've processed over 1,000 loans here locally for businesses. But for us at A Kid's Book About, we've raised a little over $8 million in the last year for our company. And I think where I'd like to start with equity is how much it's been glamorized. And so when a company raises equity, you see an article about that. When a company goes and gets the same dollar amount in a loan, you do not see an article about that. From a context perspective, less than 0.5% of US companies will ever raise equity. So that's less than 1 in 200 businesses will ever raise equity. So it's a really poor tool for most instances. I'm also an angel investor, and I spend a lot of my time talking new founders out of taking equity, and I quickly do that by explaining how it works. So, Juan, I'm gonna give you $1, and in 5 to 7 years, I want $10 back for every dollar I gave you. And in order for Juan to do that, he's got to have some sort of liquidation event or his business scale to the extent where he can afford to do that. Most companies, just by structure, will not be able to pull that off. And it doesn't make them a bad company, it just makes them a bad fit for equity. And so one of the things that came up in our conversations was all these things, if I'm taking in the stories as an entrepreneur right now, you would be led to believe that validation of my idea and where I want to go is based on if I'm able to raise money. And that's such a fallacy. 30% of US companies ever get debt. So 70% of businesses, the normal thing to do, you just go with one investor, and that's this thing called customers. And right now we have a lot of founders that are spinning their wheels and spending a lot of time chasing after investors, and oftentimes, most of the time, a really bad fit for their business instead of spending that time chasing after customers who can help them better validate their product and validate its place in the market. So equity, a really great tool in very few instances, but it's the thing you're going to read the most about in the paper. And so how do we help founders get that context as they navigate their multitude of options on how to fund their business, either starting or expanding or going into new markets?
It's so complicated. There are so many financing tools out there, right? And so, Juan, how do you guide businesses in identifying which path to pursue? As they're starting up or expanding, I'm just curious what that process looks like on your side.
Yeah, so my name is Juan Barraza, Director of Center for Entrepreneurship at Portland State, and I done a stint as a scout for Vamos Ventures. Just like Steven mentioned, right? You just sit down with the founder, and I've been on both sides, right? As a founder and guiding our students or up-and-coming entrepreneurs, and for them to understand what are the forms of capitalization, right? Many times it will not be the equity route, but the path is to get consumers actually paying for their services, right? What Eric was saying a few minutes ago, right? Get in front of consumers that will pay for your product and give you the validation you need by buying your products. That's the best way to do it. And trying to figure out the cash flow, right? If they can grow their business as our fathers and mothers have done in the past by selling their products and reinvesting some of those profits back in the business, that's the best way to do it. And later on, as you scale, you can then start exploring equity investment, but you have better leverage. So try to steer people away from angel investing in equity when it's not the right fit. Many angel investors or equity funds, they're looking for that way, the flywheel effect, right? How do you have a product that is going to be able to scale rapidly, and I get my 10x return, my $10 for every dollar I give you? So try to give that reality check at the beginning. That's the first way that we approach them when we talk to founders.
And I think as we kind of transition into like a debt conversation, I think what's really interesting is for those of us, I always say being a founder means you're smart enough to know something's a good idea, but dumb enough not to say no, right? Because if you know too much, you'll stay at that great job at Nike where a check comes every 2 weeks and you have insurance and things kind of work versus going into something where you may lose money for years before it turns around. And I think in that consumer world, we bring that bias with us into business. And I think in Maggie's life, what she's dealing with is talking to people where they think about what it means to get a car loan and they apply that to a business. And that's where things oftentimes go really, really wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Stephen. I mean, I think for myself as a consumer, my first experience with debt was not a business loan. And since I'm not a founder, I've actually never had a business loan, but I've proffered many a business loan in my career. And so when my anchor as a consumer is like a mortgage or a student loan or a car, all with very, very low interest rates, it's kind of a misnomer when small business owners or founders then go to apply for a loan and see these interest rates that seem really high, but when you think about kind of the economics behind it, it's actually quite low and in many cases better than from a long-term investment standpoint equity, because that $1 isn't going to require that $10 in return, right? And so I think just really understanding debt and unpacking what that can be for a founder and how important it can be for a growing company is something that I always love talking about. But going back to something that Juan just mentioned, cash flow, I mean, that's something that we as lenders look at. And I think sometimes founders are looking so much at growth, that they're not monitoring both cash, which is the adage,
cash is king.
Who's the queen? We'll find out. We'll workshop that, as somebody earlier said. I like that. But thinking about cash flow, that's how you not only grow your company organically and maintain control, right? Like when you have equity investment, there's something you are relinquishing financially, sometimes also managerially as well. And so just thinking about, again, what is the right fit for your growing company and what do you have access to? And sometimes that access to equity is not there and the access to debt is not there. And so companies end up bootstrapping. So I'm interested in the place where how can we increase access to capital for growing companies, and what are the barriers that we see, you in working with entrepreneurs and as an entrepreneur yourself, and having worked with many businesses, what are some of the key things that you have seen in your experiences?
I know a couple of cases local, right? Entrepreneurs that launched in the middle of the pandemic. I hear Eric saying something about restaurateur. Trying to figure out creative ways to finance their POs. I have a couple of entrepreneurs that have started with 30,000 units purchase order from a grocery store locally. How they finance that? Somebody that has 1 million units already committed, they're ready to buy. How they finance that purchase order is something that's needed, right? Is being able to inject just enough capital to manufacture the products you're manufacturing.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest unlocks in working in access to capital for 15, 20 years is the real value, and the cheat code is really social capital for a business. And I don't think business owners oftentimes understand that you can go in one door and it's a bank and it says bank up there and you have a 20% chance of getting a loan. You can go into another door and it says bank up there, but your chances of getting a loan are 70%, right? They assume once I go through one door, all of them are the same. And the difference between knowing which door to go into is really social capital. And the folks that are able to have persistence and work through, it all depends on who's in their circle. And so, 8 years ago, some friends and I, we started a restaurant. And restaurants are generally a really poor idea. We're still in business today, but we were smart enough to know to talk to people like Brian Steelman, who's here, and he was able to not only answer the questions we had, but also ask the questions that we didn't even know to ask. And so when it comes to access to capital, how are you building up a group of people around you that can help you understand those nuances and help you know the questions to ask and know the things, know what Maggie's talking about when she's talking about debt income ratios, all of these things that just blow over your mind. If you don't have that social capital, it's really, really hard to push through. And in this world where, I think now is the best time ever to be starting a business because one, it's cheaper than ever to start and scale a business. And two, you have access to capital options that never existed before, right? 10 years ago, crowdfunding wasn't a thing. But all of those things require you knowing somebody, knowing the questions to ask, figuring those out. And all too often, we just people don't have access to those networks, especially people that look like us.
True. Well, and it's not being able to access those networks, and it's also it's demoralizing getting rejected, right? Like, who here has been rejected? Okay, those of you with your hands down are not listening or you're lying. Right? Like, it stinks, and nobody wants to get told no, and I think there are two kinds of no's, right? Like, there's the no, but good luck, and it's a nice sandwich compliment, or no, and I do see promise in your business concept or idea. Here are some things you need to do. Here's what at least this is what I like to do when I'm working with businesses, is identify, and I think you and your experiences probably have done this too, having that real conversation of, here's for our institution the steps that you would need to take to be quote unquote loan ready. What does that look like? What's the path that you need to lay before you take on debt, for example? And I think, to Stephen's point, that social capital is really key, because if you get told no from one institution and they're not able to look you in the eye and say, yeah, but I see promise here, and either this bank or this nonprofit community lender, like where I work, could be an option. Talk to them. Let me connect you. Let me do a warm handoff, an introduction. And those are the kinds of things that I would like to see more of in our community, because there's no one-size-fits-all lender. And to the extent that consumers like you or founders like you have choices, puts the power in your hands to make the right informed choice for your growing company. I'm curious, Stephen, you just mentioned kind of the barriers that exist for people who look like you. I am not from Portland originally. I heard there was a shout out, a little Pennsylvania shout out to somebody in the audience who was from Philly earlier. I was like, woo! So, when I moved to Oregon, I was not very aware of the history of this state, especially the racist history that has kind of led to this moment where we are today, not only with our housing market and our local economy, but especially our small business community. I'm curious, where I feel like we're at an inflection point where there's an opportunity to pivot in a different direction. Is that something that you're observing with capital right now?
It is an inflection point in access to capital, but it is not coming from the established players. You see a growth, an interest in access, VCs, angel investors or bankers from communities of color, right? Latinx, Black, and angel investors and VCs, they are recognizing there's a lack of presence in the community, and they're stepping into that role. So that's the opportunity, right? More folks from Latinx and Black communities are stepping into the role. What is missing from our established players is that intentionality, right? That rather than follow the traditional playbook, like, you know where I am, knock on my door, I'll talk to you, make an appointment, come into the communities, right? We just had a gathering a few days ago with the general manager partner from Vamos Ventures, flew from LA just to meet with the local entrepreneurs. And we haven't seen that happen from our local established players. So that intentionality, that's the opportunity that we have. 1 in 4 students at elementary school are BIPOC right now. And by 2040, those students are gonna be out of college, building businesses. If you want to invest on them, you need to start getting to know the communities right now, because by 2040 it's going to be too late.
Yeah, I think so much of this is about context, context and story. I really love what Jelani and Camila were talking about earlier, and a big piece of this is the stories that we tell ourselves, right? So it's really hard to be what you don't see, and if you're looking in the news and in articles and you never see yourself, then these stories start to wind up, oh, well, I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm not supposed to, I don't see, I don't see men running ice cream businesses, so I could never start Salt and Straw if I'm Kim over here. But when you start, unearthing and going through and looking at numbers, there's much more context, and it gives you context and data for what's going on. So here in Oregon, we've got more than 22,000 Latinx founders, businesses. We've got more than 6,000 Black businesses. But in the same time frame we've tripled the number of Black businesses in the last 10 years, the amount of loans going to those businesses has dropped 95%, right? And so imagine the context if you're an investor going, well, I know Stephen and Jelani, so I'm good, versus, well, no, there's 6,000 Stephen and Jelanis. Boy, I need to get my crap together because I only know one, right? And so if we can start changing those stories, I think we'll start seeing some different outcomes. But that starts with understanding the difference between transactions and community, right? I think we have an investment network and a lending network that's fine doing transactions, but you got to come see us in Lake Oswego. You got to come see us in the Pearl. You got to look like us and went to our same schools or know someone that did those things. And then we're fine to chat with you. But they're not trying to get an invite to the cookout, right? They're not. This event this week with the Latinx founders we're with, that's the first time that's ever happened. And it took somebody coming here from 1,200 miles away, which is appalling in a place where there's 22,000 Latinx founders. So how do we change those stories that we're telling ourselves, that we've been telling ourselves? And then how do we pivot from transactional relationships to going for building community and trust? The first bank that I worked at a long time ago, it had a bar in it, like a functioning bar. And the bank would close, and then the bar would open, and that's how you found out what was going on with Juan or Camila or Kim. Before they ever missed a loan payment, you guys were having a drink, and they said, oh yeah, we missed out on this really big customer, or all the stuff that was meant for Delta Airlines melted on the way there, and they don't have any ice cream. Okay, let's figure that out. But now we've got 40% less lenders than we did 20 years ago, and it's transactional stuff. So when you go in and you apply for a loan with a bank, they say, well, the computer said this. Well, why did it say that? I don't know, that's what the computer said. Versus 20, 30 years ago, the person that was taking your application was also the person that was saying yes or no on the application, and they had a specific knowledge about the businesses in the community. And so those are the kind of things that we have to kind of steer towards, especially in underrepresented communities where we prioritize trust over everything. So I don't care if you've got billions of dollars. If I don't see people that look like me, or I don't know that you have street cred in my community, why would I come to you?
The social capital, right? Building relationships. People are often ask us, what do I need to do? It's very simple. Get out of the building, go into the neighborhood, buy coffee, and meet with people there.
Well, and assume we exist, right? Like, that's the first step. If you don't assume we exist, you're not going to leave the office, right? Because you're going to be like, well, I met Jelani and Stephen and Juan. I'm kind of good. Like, I text with them. We're straight.
And there's more people that do better work than we ever will do, right? I just met Eric, had met Rommel and Herman, and they're kicking ass, right? But very few people know about them. So just get out there and get lots of coffee.
And there's funders that love Oregon. One of the amazing investors that's in Salt and Straw is based out of New York. And I'm an LP in a fund that invests in funds that invest in companies like Salt and Straw. And we came to realize that they've been coming to Oregon for decades, and they were really excited about the brands that came out of here. But if you were just to sit here and not ever interact with them, you would think that no one invests in restaurants or food businesses. And so again, it seems like to keep on coming back to like social capital, right? And how do I find out about these things that seem to go against what I'm reading about or the stories that I'm telling myself?
I mean, the last 18 months has been a doozy, to say the least. This is my first event getting out to seeing humans that I'm not related to, or not my offspring, or aren't furry, right? So pardon the social awkwardness right now, but this is amazing. How do entrepreneurs, how do founders, especially now where we're just re-entering kind of these formal social gatherings, like what are some good ways to build that social capital right now, if you're just starting out?
The way it worked for me when I stumbled into the startup ecosystem in Portland, I was attending every single event that I could, right? Regardless if that was driven by a Latinx community or part of the community in general. Just meeting people is one step at a time, and just get to know what they had to offer. The pro tip here is just be aware that when you meet with people that they have an interest, like a consultants or equity investors or etc., that's their job, to meet with people, try to get their business. So just try to be selective. And when you're a founder, it is gonna be, and you're a solo founder or you have another partner, it's either you doing the networking and meeting with people, or you building your product and making sales. So just be careful with your time. Everybody's gonna be excited to get to know you at first, but that can be a time suck and take away from growing your business. Just step out there, step in the communities. Event like this is a very good step to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's amazing about the Portland community is it's a small, big town, and you're in such proximity to folks doing amazing things, and those people want to see you win, right? So we believe in community over competition, and so if I'm starting a business and I appreciate what Kim's doing at Salt and Straw, Brianne's doing at Tender Loving Empire, reach out to them, and guess what? They'll probably email you back, right? Seek to provide value to those folks. Because the life of building a business it's a lonely thing. Most of your friends have 8 to 5 jobs, and so they don't understand why you're still working at 10 o'clock. And so to have somebody reach out who's where you were 12 months ago or 12 years ago or whatever, of course you want to help them understand the things that they want to avoid. So leverage connecting with folks. Be great about follow-up. I mean, there's so much to be said about just following up with someone and saying, it was so nice to meet you at the event, I'd love to buy you coffee. Always offer to compensate people for their time. I think that's one of the things that I've really come out of COVID understanding more than ever is everyone's time is valuable. Someone can always turn me down, but if I'm asking for someone's time, I always offer to compensate them financially, right? Show them the money. They can say no, that's fine, but I think that's a really important thing to do for folks.
And one of the things, 10 years ago, buying coffee or getting people to invite them to coffee, you'd be surprised how many people will say yes, right? Even until this day, Rick, I keep offering to buy coffee. If he ever decides to come out and meet with people again, I have a plethora of coffee for him ready.
Maggie, I'd love to know, what are a couple of things that you wish people knew that we're thinking about or wanting to go borrow money? What do you wish folks knew that by and large they're not prepared for when they jump into that process?
I think one that we touched on earlier, that business lending is very different from probably your experience as a consumer. And so when you go to apply for a loan, it's going to be a similar process, but the product itself that a business lender is offering is going to be different from what your mortgage lender is offering or your car lender is offering. And so just keeping an open mind to what's out there, and that flexibility that debt can provide as a tool to finance and grow your business. I think another thing, and I will channel one of our credit risk management officers who describes the personal and business tension as the same pair of pants with 2 different pockets. Small businesses try really hard to keep their business and personal lives separate. And sometimes lenders like us, actually many lenders, not just nonprofit and lenders like us, will want to look at your personal credit report or ask for personal collateral to pledge, especially if you're a startup or especially if you don't have a track record of profitability. Different things that, and actually many lenders will look at your kind of global picture, your household picture of income as a way to understand the debt service coverage. Thank you, Stephen, for introducing that term earlier. And so I think those two things that, yeah, I know that you are trying to keep your business separate from who you are as an individual and as a founder, and we want that, right? We want to see your bank statement, your bank account is all, you have one for your business, you have one for your personal life. We want to see that your profit and loss doesn't have an accidental entry of like my lunch that I had with my coworkers up the street before this. We want to see that separate, but also keep in mind that we are going to look at the global picture. And that's part of just how credit is structured in this country. We have we put a lot of emphasis on personal experience, personal credit, and so that's going to kind of flow into your business. Hence the same pair of pants, two different pockets, which is I like that as a visual. So I think those are two things that really I would call out. And then if I may add one final one, just as a recap to what Juan brought up earlier, cash flow. Cash flow is so important to understanding for you as a business. Like, it's not just about revenue, it's about what your bottom line is, and it's about what your cash position is. And those are two different things. Understanding the difference will help you grow your business, and understanding how those tools work in tandem is a powerful concept that will, I think, empower you to just make better decisions as a founder. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask me or any of us. We would be happy we would be happy to talk to you about it. So I volunteer these folks with me.
Wondering, Maggie, what kind of businesses Craft3 serves? Where is the bulk of business you see coming and you're working with?
That's a great question. We have 8 offices across Oregon and Washington. We are a fairly large loan fund. And so I can speak best from my own experience. We typically see existing growing companies that are either historically profitable or approaching profitability. In terms of sectors, we serve a variety of sectors. I work a lot with growing food and beverage companies. We actually have a new revolving line of credit for growing food and beverage companies. We just approved our first loan, closed the first loan this week to a tea company out of Eugene, which is really exciting. And so I personally see a lot of businesses that are in the food and beverage space. But we do serve all different sectors, and in terms of the entrepreneurial profile, it's typically an existing business, although we do finance startups. What I like to see, and if you've heard of the 5 C's of credit, 2 of them are character and cash flow. Those are the 2 that are most important to me. Collateral is nice to have, but that's not what we're going to lend on. We're going to lend on you as the founder, as the entrepreneur, on your character, and underwriting that, and we're also going to be kind of leaning on cash flow and the ability for the business to pay back the debt as the other, again, this is from my experience, most important pillar, if you will. And that's because giving a business a loan where there's no clear path to repayment is a lose-lose for both the lender and the entrepreneur. And so while we do want to take risks, and we do take calculated risks all the time, having a clear path to repayment is important, and that can be based on projections, or it can be based on the past. Most lenders actually operate in the past. They look at your historic financials, they look at your tax returns, they look at your credit. All of these things are retrospective. We as a lender are able to look into the future, and that's one of the many reasons why I love working at Craft3. We also, 4 years ago, as I look for my colleague Chi in the audience to correct me, started working on what is now the Equitable Lending Initiative. And that was a way for us as a lender to break down barriers to entrepreneurs, namely entrepreneurs of color, that have been systemic in our society. And that's something that I'm really proud of the work that the team, led by Chi in the audience, has put forth. And because of that, And since launching that, we have, I believe, exceeded our lending goals in terms of tripling our loans to Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs of color across our footprint of Oregon and Washington. And that's really exciting that we have that tool, and we are making conscious choices to ensure capital gets into the hands of growing businesses.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And as we go, I want to make sure everyone understands that access to capital isn't a bank thing. It's not an investor thing. It's the biggest bulk of money that goes to these businesses, customers. And so we all play a role in these businesses, growing and thriving. And so we all can take small steps. For us at a kids company, we support a woman-owned or minority-owned business every Thursday with our team lunches. And it's a small amount, but by the end of the year, we'll have, probably almost $10,000 into businesses that otherwise may not have gone there. And so, I want us never to forget that the fundamental funder of all these businesses is definitely customers. And us as businesses are those customers as well. And so we're making decisions every day around where we're spending money and where we're not.